Hey guys, welcome back to Game Garbage, where we take a look at games, chat about the gaming news, the industry, and of course, stream for fun. Today we're talking about the Stop Killing Games finally getting to the EU Parliament for a hearing. This is really to talk about the kind of death of video games where, with the example we're going to go over with Ubisoft, with like The Crew, though released in 2014, well, they ended service as an only online game in 2024. And that really upset a lot of players because, quote, the product that they had bought was no longer available to them. It had just been removed by the publisher. It was also removed off of Ubisoft Plus or Ubisoft Connect and was no longer available, even though it was been purchased digitally. And then, of course, physical copies, well, they don't work either. And Ubisoft did not want to, quote, support the game, but there were other ways to actually do that. And this has not been, of course, the only game, but Ubisoft is a pretty big publisher, so it's kind of the thing that the whole idea is riding on. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and watch.
I am the founder of the Stop Killing Games consumer movement, which has many shared goals with the initiative. I'd like to clarify what it means to destroy a video game. The second slide. When we say a game has been destroyed, what we mean is a publisher has permanently disabled all copies of it that have been sold so no one can ever play them again. It would be like removing every single copy of a book or film in existence, effectively erasing it from the culture. The way this practice works is first a publisher sells a copy of a video game. However, it has been designed so that it must connect to the publisher in order to...
I think that's a really good point, where he's making the point that it'd be like removing every copy of like a movie or a book, which is kind of ridiculous because, of course, that would be illegal. Once you sell a product, yeah, you no longer have really control over that product. But we've given up control in little teeny pieces over the last couple of decades that, yeah, here we are at this point where publishers are really controlling over everything over their game. And this is leading to changes in consumer behavior too, which, yeah, we'll probably talk about that at the end too.
Function. This acts as a potential kill switch. The customer is also given no information when the game will stop working, even though the publisher has decided to assume that responsibility. Then, after an undisclosed length of time, the publisher disables all existing copies of the game, but keeps the customer's money. The publisher also enacts countermeasures to ensure repairing the game. Repairing the game is almost impossible, even for experienced software professionals. From this point onward, no customer can ever run the purchase again. Besides destroying the game, this practice is also subverting customer expectations. Most video games can work indefinitely, which has been the customer standard for half a century, including ones that connect to the internet. Alternately, a small number of video games operate as subscription services, but those inform the customer exactly when their access ends at the time of payment. The games we're referring to do no such thing. It's a bit of miscommunication. They almost always contain terms stating they can end at any time for any reason. What this means is customers have no real protections when they buy games like these. They are unable to keep them and they are not informed when they will end. This behavior would be outrageous in other industries. If you bought a book in a store, the publisher cannot come into your home and take back your book at will. If you bought an insurance policy, you would be informed when that policy ends, not that the seller could end it at any time for any reason, but still keep your money.
I'll stop it there. And yeah, this is the thing too that I definitely am frustrated with is like live service as a whole is not necessarily a bad thing. But to not be informed about how long a game is going to be viable, how long that those purchases like cosmetics are going to be able to be used, or whether they're transferring to the next game or not, like Madden or COD or Battlefield now at this point, if it's going to be a yearly release. And yeah, this really gets pretty frustrating because I think even with kind of current games now, people are at a point where they're not really willing to take that chance because a lot of live service games now cost money. They're not just necessarily free to play, even though there's some of those out there. There's a lot of games that have certainly adopted the $40 or $60 model and are continuing on with that, with also the crazy prices of microtransactions too. And I think too, a good example is Marathon, because if Marathon is not necessarily going to go over very well, it's had controversy basically since it was announced and what type of game it was going to be as an extraction shooter. Well, are people really going to buy a game that's just going to die anyway? It's not like they're not going to get their money back, and that's where some of the consumer behavior is changing. Because, yeah, if the consumer is not really treated as a customer, then yeah, they know that the company has no loyalty to them. They don't really care about them. They just care about their money, and this is why stuff with live service is changing.
The games being sold this way are operating similar to scams. Publishers know customers expect video games to last, so they sell these in the same way as ones that can work forever, as a one-time purchase with no expiry date, then price them the same. Publishers know that if customers were informed exactly when they plan to disable their games, that would reduce sales, since the longevity of a game affects how much customers are willing to pay. The industry is trying to have it both ways, finding ways to say they're selling you a game that they're not selling you. This creates confusion for everyone involved and is part of why it's taking customers so long to get exposure on this practice. The legality is also unsettled. Earlier, members of Parliament assisted us in asking questions to the EU Commission about how legal the terms and game license agreements were, especially being able to terminate them at any time for any reason. The Commission stated Directive 93/13 EEC prohibits unfair terms causing a significant imbalance in the parties' rights and obligations to the detriment of consumers. The Commission also recommended consumers file complaints with businesses across member states through the European Consumer Centers Network. In 2024, we had volunteers across the majority of EU countries submitting complaints against the French company Ubisoft for disabling the game The Crew. The responses we received from the ECC network were extremely inconsistent. Some officials said there was nothing they could do. Others said the company was required to run the game indefinitely, which is unrealistic. But the majority stated there was no clear regulation on this practice. We were independently able to get thousands of complaints submitted to consumer agencies in France and Germany, but there still has been no decision on them on the legality either. To the best of our knowledge, no one in the EU has ever been compensated for this and hundreds of other titles. In short, governments in EU countries are not sure how to handle this situation, and customers are overwhelmingly not being compensated for the loss of their purchases. It is an ideal situation for clear regulation. This is not a new practice. It started approximately 2005 and began negatively impacting customers for them around 2010 onward. However, it often affects a minority of customers whose complaints can get lost in the system. It wasn't until a large case affecting millions that any attempts to get government attention were possible, and there still is no answer.
I'll pause it there. Yeah, many people don't realize how long live service has been going on, and while it has been going on for quite a while, roughly 20 years, it's definitely morphed into different stuff. But now we're definitely at a point with 2015 with Rainbow Six Siege. That was supposed to be a full game, but they just kept the multiplayer, and that's what Siege was. And then we had Overwatch in 16, we had Fortnite in 17, we had Black Ops 4, I think, in 2018, 19 was Apex Legends, and it really changed from then on. The microtransactions, more stuff they could sell you. The season passes, collections of content of maps and weapons and campaign and stuff, that disappeared, and it just became more about the bundles and skins and cosmetics, and that's what most people are hating. And then too, as an example with Destiny 2, it became more about a game and the experience, and then with the Eververse, well, it shifted more into kind of what they could sell you, what they could, get into your wallet for, the kind of bundles, the sales, the FOMO of, oh, hey, it's only this weekend or whatever. And then they started adding content that they then took away too, which I think that's part of the same issue here, at least on principle. But let's keep going.
The EU Commission says this must be handled on a case-by-case basis, but this practice is extremely widespread. Future slides. We have formed an amateur study examining over 1,100 video games that require a connection to the publisher. The majority of these have been deliberately disabled by the publisher, with many of the rest still at risk of being destroyed. Under the strictest interpretation of what it means to disable a game, the study found that out of over 400 titles, publishers disable a customer's purchase 93.5% of the time when ending support. This business practice is responsible for more destruction to the medium than anything else by an enormous margin. There is also a strong correlation between this practice and the size of the publisher, as most small studios do not engage in it, as it requires far more resources, work, and liability than they can handle. So even though this impacts a minority of games, it disproportionately affects customers due to the scale of the largest offenders. From sales figures, it impacts tens of millions of customers, minimum in the EU. This impacts developers as well. This may seem obvious, but based on interviews and feedback, we found the majority of game developers do not support having games they've worked on destroyed. They can spend years of their lives creating them, but they are often not the ones making these business decisions, and sometimes even sign non-disclosure agreements so they cannot voice their opinion on the matter.
I want to touch on this too, with just like all of the things that are happening and the changes with publishers and video games, and even now with like DLSS 5 as another recent example. There's a lot of control that the developers themselves, the people actually making these games, don't actually have. They don't really have control over their product, what they're making necessarily. And yet the live service push and how live service has gone, including destroying games, right? Taking them offline and not allowing them to be playable anymore because they want you to buy the next one. Well, that is just a continued thing of trying to get people to just spend more money for the product. And then too, with the whole thing with AI, it's a whole nother ball game that we're getting into with game development now. And while game developers will still be needed, probably not as many. And we've still had layoffs since October of 2022 when they started getting rid of quality assurance. And now games kind of seem like they're more buggy than ever before, generally speaking, in the gaming market. And that too has been really frustrating. And again, it's the publishers that are making these decisions. And this is why now that we've had for, roughly 5 years, a lot of big games that, quote, shouldn't fail, that were kind of bet on. And again, hundreds of millions sunk into these games. Well, people just are not buying them because they don't trust. And that's something that the publishers are missing, is that the player trust has been damaged so much with those companies, with those brands, that players basically are not going to come back. And I think this has also been helping the player bases push more toward PC and Steam because there's much wider range available for games that are fun, built for the player experience, don't have microtransactions, kind of whatever you want is available. And it's just kind of insane that we're getting to this point with game development, and then AI isn't really going to make it any better. But again, the devs that don't have a choice, well, they ultimately leave. And they make smaller studios or independent ones, and they try to create something else. Like 100 Star, that went away from Rocksteady. And, now Rocksteady isn't even really owned by Warner Brothers anymore. It's now owned by Paramount. And they're a movie company, so what's going to happen with that? There's still games in development, but yeah, we'll see what actually happens, because now you have a movie company, a subscription service company that now has a video game department. And I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do with that. But yeah, let's continue.
The main point I hope that does not get lost in this hearing is this initiative welcomes any solution that will solve the problem of video games being destroyed on this scale. We want this to be as easy and as practical as possible for all parties involved, and are very open to how that is achieved. We are not even asking publishers to change their business or monetization models, only that once they end support, they do so in a responsible way. Our only goal is to prohibit this destructive practice and thus obtain basic protections for consumers and the medium as a whole. I'd like to add a little bit on the economic aspect. Again, when planned for from the beginning, the cost can be very small. It's mostly about when it's undoing that's more of a cost related. Earlier the game Concord was mentioned. That's actually an excellent example because it's publicly stated that at least 370 million euros were spent developing that game, and it did not include an end-of-life plan like what we're seeking. Most of the cost for developing games tends to come from other areas like art assets or marketing. This is just one element out of hundreds that already go into making a game. The other thing is sometimes industry costs or estimates of how much this would cost can be faulty because they're expecting the game they're asking for to have every last feature it did while it was being supported. And many of those can be retired and don't even make sense for a game that's no longer being supported, like administration or anti-cheat measures or account management or things like that. So that can there can be hundreds, or known as microservices, associated with these that can be disabled and the customer still has the core game. So that should be taken into account when figuring out the potential cost. And it might have been mentioned earlier, but we also want to emphasize the companies have been paid already once for the working game, so that should be factored into the budgeting. There were some other points mentioned on the right to repair, whether we need it and how long a product should work. With right to repair, that's a little bit different issue. Well, that's certainly welcome, having the right to that. As I mentioned in my presentation, there are deliberate countermeasures to prevent repair. That it's almost like a small miracle when it does happen from extremely experienced software professionals for resurrecting a game. However, if there were repair instructions, that would be very welcome. I think we would even consider that a viable alternative to what we're asking, if it was practical to resurrect the game that way. And for how long it should work, it's kind of again, the customer standard is indefinitely, as long as they keep the game in good working order on their end. And we're not trying to hold any publishers responsible for updates that break things that wasn't their doing. So how long they choose to support it, we're completely open to. I mean, I think there's already existing EU regulations on that, but I mean, as far as we're concerned, they could end support the next day, but as long as the game isn't destroyed, we would find that acceptable. And the last point on the, for doing this through the existing, just doing this through the courts, through the legal action, that still doesn't get to the heart of the matter of the game itself being destroyed. We're not really refunds and compensation. Those are a secondary measure that when the game itself can't be reinstated, we just want the game preserved. So
I think I'll end it there. That's pretty good. If you want to watch the rest of it, which there's probably not too much more, then I'll leave that link down below. And then also, if you wish to hear their press conference afterward, after this hearing, you can listen to that as well. It's about an hour and 50 minutes. But yeah, the thing that I wanted to just kind of recap a little bit was, back in 2014, for maybe some of the younger audience that is watching, is like, the Crew released as 2014, but an online-only game, which was a big deal. But yeah, that wasn't normal back then. Again, this is even before Rainbow Six Siege even came out, which was the first kind of like live service game that we know today. And one thing that was not common, but was becoming more common, was always online. That was definitely a problem. And then the presence of microtransactions. Basically, microtransactions are everywhere. We all understand that. But yeah, back then, that was not normal. Okay, the game was a story and a user experience, and it was really designed that way. And if they did a good job, they got money. But yeah, the whole microtransaction scene has turned into what we have today. And while I don't inherently think that microtransactions are bad, it's just turned into this issue of just less quality, less content for more money. And it's in my opinion, is becoming a scam. So yeah, they shut down the servers in 2024. No one expects it to run for 10 years, right? Or to keep those available. But after the whole Crew thing and Stop Killing Games, and currently even Ubisoft has a brand new lawsuit that they're dealing with, is that when these online games started shutting off their servers, like Redfall, or like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was another one, they patched in an offline mode. So you could still play if you wanted to. You could still go back. Of course, you wouldn't necessarily have all of the content or the features. But again, that's not necessarily what we're asking for. So yeah, it's just kind of insane that we've gotten to this point. The other thing, too, I wanted to talk about, I really wanted to thank Pirate Software for being on the other side of the coin and helping promote Stop Killing Games and helping get them to Parliament, which the hearing that we just saw. And when we take a look at his channel, he was on the other side, basically, as far as I understand, saying that publishers should be able to do what they want, including sunsetting a game if they wished. But yeah, as you can see, weekly subscribers, you can basically kind of see when it started, and people were like mass unsubscribing. And then his views too just completely cratered. I mean, we're talking, that was 27 million views in a week, and now we're less than a million. It's kind of nuts. That's where we're at. And then too, This is just kind of like an easier view of it, but yeah, this is where his channel's at. And then I've just heard as well that I guess most of his mods, if not all, for his moderators have also quit. So anyway, yeah, it's just kind of the way things are going. He's becoming irrelevant, and he's kind of just helping his channel die more and more. There's also an area too, which I thought was interesting. Right here, there were in August 11, or at least that week anyway, there were a ton of views that just suddenly disappeared, and it was him basically scrubbing his videos. And then he did that again in February of this year as well. So anyway, yeah, it is what it is. It's kind of sad because I used to have some respect for the guy anyway, but yeah, a lot of people don't anymore, myself included. So, well, there was one more thing. So yeah, there's a class action now from the French consumer group UFC. It was announced on March 31st, which will sue Ubisoft over the crew's shutdown and allegedly deceptive business practices and abusive contract clauses. So yeah, just because there's a clause in there doesn't mean that companies can just do with whatever they want with their stuff. And I'm glad to see this. But yeah, the group calls Ubisoft's attitude toward suddenly revoking game access unacceptable in 2025. So yeah, this is going to be a new thing that Ubisoft's going to have to deal with. And with all of this stuff that's already happened, there's been multiple publishers that are already changing their policies, like Redfall and Suicide Squad, adding in an offline mode when they're taking their servers off. And I think that's good practice. But too, yeah, you can't sell a product and basically just do whatever you want when after someone has spent their money. And this is why the reputation for a lot of these companies and publishers are damaged. People just don't trust it anymore, and I don't either. And I don't like the practice because, yeah, it's not consumer first. Or they really should be customers, by the way. They should be cared about, but they don't, unfortunately. But yeah, all of this is really just for the company, just to get more money. And that's when this kind of becomes really scammy with this kind of type of stuff. So yeah, hopefully this really changes stuff around with the French consumer group and also with Stop Killing Games. But yeah, I'll keep you guys up to date. So with that, folks, I'll see you on the next one.